income qualifying programs here in the district. And so we did work with initiatives like LAHEAP, that they work a lot with income qualified residents in DC at offering them various services to help them pay some of their utility bills. And we also worked with our solar program, that they were already identifying potential residents in DC that lived in a single family home to install solar panels in their home at no cost to them. And so that's how we identified folks. We called them and asked them if they would be interested in removing their gas equipment and having it replaced. And the folks that were interested, we would kind of move them along to the next phase, which was the verification phase, which was the verifying their income. And so in some cases, we did have to collect some of this sensitive information. In other areas, we just leveraged, if they were enrolled in another income qualified initiative, we took that as our income verification. And of course, we worked with the city really closely to make sure that our processes made sense. But that's kind of how we did the income verification process. So once we knew that they were interested and that they were income verified, we actually had some of our contractors go out to their home and do a preliminary walkthrough. Again, we were doing this program in the middle of COVID. So I think we started July of 2020 is when we actually started sending our first contractors out there. All projects had to be done by the end of September. So we were working with a very, very limited amount of time. And so what the contractors were looking at during this preliminary walkthrough was for them to give us their advice of, okay, this is the existing equipment. What could you install that's a high efficiency electric kind of equal mechanical equipment to that, right? And so they were giving us recommendations of what they should get installed, but they were also looking at their electrical systems and seeing if the work could even be done within the time we had. We have a lot of really old homes in DC, and especially when you're looking at some of these demographics of like older homes that with folks that don't have a lot of disposable income to make the upgrades that the home may need, you can see some really bad electrical systems in there. And so we wanted to make sure that the contractor felt comfortable that if they started the work, that they could actually finish it. I mean, if you worked with a contractor before, you know that they won't touch something unless they can finish it within the time that they need, within the time that they have to do it. So they would go there and give us their initial assessment of, this is what the home can do, like this is what you can install in there, and it's possible for us to get that work done within the time that we had. So for those homes that could be done in the time allotted, we also then sent out another contractor to do a blower door test because we were doing weatherization in these homes. So essentially they were looking for opportunities to have a better envelope in the home so that the homes could also be a lot more comfortable. And also they were looking at some health components like, is there HVAC, are there gas leaks or things like that we should be aware of, and things like that. And just, is there enough insulation? So they gave us like a whole report that kind of outlined, their recommendations. And so after we got that, we would provide the report to the install contractor and they would go and do the installations. So they would go remove all the equipment, the gas equipment and the appliances, and install the high efficiency electric measures. And then once all of that work was done, we sent out the blower, we conducted another energy audit essentially and did a blower door test to see if the envelope of the home had improved as a result of the weatherization and the other measures that the contractors had installed. Now, once all of the work was done and we had gotten a final report of this is where the house is now, I actually reached out to each of the customers. We ended up doing 10 homes, and I reached out to them and kind of asking them like, how did it go? Like, how did you feel about it? How is your new system working? Is it what you thought it was going to be? Like, we had a whole survey essentially for it. And these are some of the lessons that we learned through doing this program. You can go to the next slide, please. So we learned that each home is really unique and the pricing can vary depending on the home. No home is the same, especially when you're looking at older homes. The systems, we saw some houses that had heating systems from the 50s somehow. I don't know how that was still a thing. There were some homes that still were utilizing oil to heat their homes. So we saw all kinds of stuff. And each different variants caused the pricing to vary. So it was really difficult for us to really gauge what was the expected cost for each home when they were just so unique. One thing that we also learned was that residents were really not motivated to get rid of their gas stoves. We interviewed every single person before they were enrolled in the program, and we asked them, like, we gave them the rundown of this is what the program is, this is what it entails, and they agreed to have all their appliances replaced with electric versions, because the goal was to remove all gas appliances. And they did not want to get rid of their stoves. There was some cases where, based on where the stove was located, we couldn't really put in an electric stove. But in some cases, the people just didn't want to get rid of it. They wanted to keep their gas. And the other thing that I was really surprised about was that all participants were really happy with their new systems. This was something that we were extremely concerned about, because one thing that I would have hated to hear is that after we've gone through this whole process and replaced all of their HVAC equipment, that the customer is not happy with it. We were concerned about that also because radiant heat feels very differently than pushed hot air, right? It's just a different feeling. And so we were afraid that the residences wouldn't like this new heating. Maybe they thought it wasn't hot enough. Maybe they just didn't like how their house changed and they wanted to go back. So it's just a concern that we had. Even in the bathrooms, like in the event where we had to install mini split systems, I mean, it wasn't possible for us to put an air handler in every single room in the house. Like, the point was for us to put them in the areas that were, going to be the most utilized, which would not be a bathroom. So we, especially for some of the seniors or some other folks that were used to having a hot bathroom because they have a radiator there, were they going to be okay that it wasn't, it wasn't, they didn't have their functioning radiating heat there. But overall, I would say that people were really happy with it. The district actually gave us funding to do this type of work for another 5 years. It is a little bit different. Like, we have a program running right now where we're doing electrification, but we are not doing weatherization or the blower door test anymore. We're just replacing their hot water heaters and their HVAC from gas to electric. So we're focusing on that, and we're hoping that rather than doing 10 homes or 20 homes, that we can, 10 homes, we're hoping to do more like 10 to 30 potentially homes this year. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We'll see how this evolves. This is a new concept for us. Like, doing electrification is something that we're just really tackling now. We're so used to doing like for like. And so I'm also really curious to see how this progresses as we do more homes. And that's pretty much it. I can go to the next slide. It has my contact information if anybody has any questions or would like to know more about this pilot. But again, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm here if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So handing it over to me, Jennifer Rosenthal. Thank you, Liz, for that introduction earlier. So I'm going to be talking today about a beneficial electrification success story. So specifically highlighting TVA's program. If you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Environmental and Energy Study Institute defines beneficial electrification or strategic electrification as a term for replacing direct fossil fuel use equipment with electricity in a way that reduces overall emissions and energy costs. So there are many opportunities across both the residential and commercial sectors. And the topic of beneficial electrification or strategic electrification has been an important topic for many years. So as you can kind of see here, where is this happening? As the map indicates, electrification is happening across the country and across the different types of electric utilities. So from major IOUs to small co-ops. You can go to the next slide, please. So here at TRC, we deliver advanced energy, decarb, and resiliency solutions for our customers. So that includes some energy advisory services, distributed energy resource strategies, technical and engineering services, and customer program design and delivery. So we are happy to have partnered with TVA on the implementation of their Energy Right for Business and Industry program since 2013. So as I mentioned, for today's presentation, we'll focus specifically on the success of their beneficial electrification program. So we're going to kind of go through how they entered into the beneficial electrification realm, talk about some of the success that they have achieved, and highlight some of their implemented projects. I do want to point out that we are also fortunate to have Chris Bohm, an energy analyst with the TVA Energy Right for Business and Industry Group, in attendance today. So Chris will be available after the presentations to help with any kind of Q&A that may come up from what I talk about today. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So a brief history of TVA. As you can kind of see here, I'm not going to read it for you. It was formed nearly 90 years ago with the main focus on making life better for the people of the Tennessee Valley. Next slide, please. So as you can see, electrification is not something new to TVA. This is what electrification looked like in the Valley, 80 years ago. And electrifying, really providing electricity to the people of the Valley, was a key tenet in the TVA Act of 1933. Next slide, please. And so you can kind of take a look electrification today. So maybe what the purpose is behind it may have changed a little bit, but the whole idea of electrifying the Valley is not something new. Next slide, please. So a little bit more on TVA. They cover, 7-state territory, 80,000 square miles. I do want to point out, a lot of their continued efforts around decarbonization. So as you can see here, their portfolio is 55% carbon free since 2020, and they've, achieved a 60% carbon reduction since 2005. So, they are really focusing on providing clean electricity for the people of the Valley. Next slide, please. So electrification offers three major benefits towards achieving TVA's kind of overarching mission. First one being energy. So electrification with favorable load shape is right for maintaining low cost energy throughout the valley. From an environment perspective, electrification that results in a net decrease to CO2 emissions or a decrease in fuel consumption is right for the environment. And for economic development, fuel switching that results in lower costs and higher profits to Valley businesses is right for economic development. Next slide, please. So leading the charge on electrification efforts, specifically in the C&I space, is TVA's Energy Right for Business and Industry program. As you can see here, they offer up incentives for smart energy technologies. They provide technical advice to commercial and industrial customers. And they also offer up tools and research to help customers make the best use of their energy. Next slide, please. Okay, so to better understand the transition to electrification, I'm going to give what I promise is going to be a really brief history lesson on TVA's energy efficiency efforts. So the Energy Right program origins can be really traced back to 2007, when TVA announced a new strategic plan with a renewed emphasis on energy efficiency and demand response. From that, the initial commercial efficiency advice and incentives launched in 2009, but it was limited to evaluations and rebates for select HVAC and lighting measures in the state of Mississippi and in the Nashville, Tennessee area. So building upon the success of that initial offering, Energy Right for Business and Industry program expanded to all commercial and industrial customers within the Valley in 2010. And in 2011, the Energy Right program launched their formal trade ally network known as the Preferred Partners Network, also known as the PPN. So at its height, the network was made up of over 1,200 individual contacts. And throughout the life of the program, the PPN has consistently delivered more than 80% of all gigawatt hours achieved. That's both energy efficiency and also new load. And after achieving and often exceeding those annual efficiency goals, the business and industry program was fully subscribed in 2013 and ceased accepting new applications. So they really drove a lot of success in a short amount of time. Shortly after selecting TRC as program implementer in late 2013, the efficiency program reopened in 2014, and by mid-2014, TVA expanded their program offerings to include non-road electric vehicles. So this really kind of marks the initial foray into the beneficial electrification world for TVA. Next slide, please. So with this non-road electric vehicle or NREV pilot, we really focus on 4 types of kind of initial measure offerings. So you can kind of see them here. There's truck stop electrification, which is the use of off-board power to support truck drivers' rest period needs. So instead of idling, drivers are able to actually just plug in their trucks to continue to use power. Airport ground support equipment, so that includes luggage tugs, pushbacks, and belt loaders. Forklifts, which are pretty self-explanatory, those that you would often see, in a warehouse or distribution center. And also electric truck refrigeration units. So those really support the delivery of food and other perishable items. So after doing, some extensive market potential studies, an initial goal to achieve 5% aggregate market development was established. Next slide, please. So here's some of the results from this NREV pilot. So we were able to convert 651 fossil-fueled units of equipment to electric-powered alternatives across the service territory, and also install 24 of those electrification stations at truck stops. So results included net CO2 emissions reductions of over 209,000 tons and load growth of about 9.4 gigawatt hours. So based on this data, it was determined that revenue would surpass the cost of the incentives in less than 5 years, while also providing cost-effective economic and environmental benefits to TVA customers. So building upon this initial pilot success, TVA continued this NREV offering through 2016. Next slide, please. So in 2016, TVA really recognized some significant market changes. Like many utilities across the country, TVA was experiencing declining load. And in addition to this declining load, TVA was witnessing an increase in naturally occurring energy efficiency. So LED lighting, for example, was becoming more cost effective for customers even without incentives. So going hand in hand with that naturally occurring EE was an increase in free ridership. The incentives were not having the same motivational impact as they had in the past, and evaluations were proving more and more customers would have moved forward with their efficiency project without incentives. And finally, an increase in consumer choice. More energy efficient equipment was becoming readily available without a significant incremental cost over their less efficient counterparts. Next slide, please. So in light of this information, it became clear that a change was needed. So to address these existing market changes and in anticipation of future changes, the need for efficient load was identified. And roughly 1 year later, in early 2017, a solution was developed and ready for implementation. Next slide, please. And in March 2017, TVA introduced the smart energy technologies into their portfolio of incentive options. So they were able to leverage their existing energy efficiency program infrastructure to seamlessly offer both energy efficiency and electrification incentives. So to the end use customer, this simply felt like new opportunities to participate in the same trusted programs they have already known. So in addition to the ongoing NREV program, TVA introduced some standard HVAC equipment, including heat pumps, food service equipment such as electric griddles and electric fryers, and custom incentives like infrared heating or curing. Next slide, please. So after continuing to monitor market changes in consumer habits, it was determined in 2018 that energy efficiency makes good business sense even without incentives. So following the successful launch of those smart electric technologies in 2017, the Energy Right program fully transitioned to a beneficial electrification program and retired their traditional energy efficiency incentives. So while the traditional incentives were retired, the program continued to really support EE engagement and education and encourage customers to pursue EE opportunities. So this included establishing a platform for customers to connect with approved trade allies if they were interested in moving forward with, a lighting project or some other energy efficiency project. So we wanted to continue to support customers in their pursuit of becoming more energy efficient. Next slide, please. So since 2018, the program has continued to evolve and expand to include the measures you see here on this slide. So in 2018, that includes the launch of a new construction and building revitalization incentive offering, some thermal storage offerings, and high volume, low speed fans. So this is really kind of an overview of the various measure offerings within the program. So now that you've kind of had this crash course in the history of the program and how it kind of entered into electrification, promise no quizzes, let's take a look at some of the program results. Next slide, please. So you can kind of see here the program has achieved continued success year after year since 2018. The program has consistently exceeded goals while adhering to program budgets, realizing more than 300 gigawatt hours in load added. So we've established kind of those available measures. We've taken a look at the realized success, but how did we get here? Next slide, please. So I kind of highlighted this previously, but the program really took an approach of layering on existing success. So they really took the platform that was established with the energy efficiency infrastructure, so applications and processing systems, engineering expertise, incentive fulfillment practices, and implementation partners. And they were able to easily pivot to expand incentive offerings to electrification measures. So again, from a customer perspective, electrification offerings were simply another item on the incentive menu. We also successfully leveraged the Trade Ally Network, known as the Preferred Partners Network. We also kind of layered on then those new smart energy technology measures. So as we began to better understand the market and customer needs, technology offerings were modified accordingly. And finally, we really highlighted equally on the non-energy benefits. So even though we had financial incentives available, we really tried to focus as much on those non-energy benefits. This could include, increased comfort in restaurants using electric cooking equipment versus gas cooking equipment, or decreased noise in warehouses using electric forklifts. So by highlighting those non-energy benefits, customers were able to better understand the full benefit of installing those electric technologies. Next slide, please. So kind of talked about this, but leveraging those program partners. So establishing partnerships in a Trade Ally network for supporting incentive programs is not anything groundbreaking, but it is critical to recognize that vendors and contractors are the true sales experts. So while incentives may open the door to customers, we want to make sure that the contractors are fully aware of program opportunities, including any program rules and requirements. Next slide, please. So to that end, TVA established a detailed and extensive collaborative learning approach. So in addition to training those preferred partner network members, training also included internal TVA field staff members, TVA and TRC program teams, and all 154 local power companies. So this approach allowed for collaboration amongst all members to really drive electrification projects. Next slide, please. So you can kind of see here the main objectives for that collaborative learning approach. So really focusing on aligning marketing and messaging, electrification education and understanding of any barriers, and identifying opportunities for projects across the valley. You can kind of see on the right-hand side of the slide the different avenues that were used to leverage and support these objectives. I think the key takeaway is making it a really collaborative learning experience for everyone. Next slide, please. So through these collaboration efforts, the program supported electrification projects in a variety of facility types. You can kind of see a sampling of facilities here. Really, the key takeaway is understanding that electrification opportunities are everywhere. So the next couple of slides will go pretty quickly. I think I'm coming up on time soon, but we'll take a look at some of the real program projects. Next slide, please. So this is a family farm in Mississippi. They had been using diesel motors for their pivot irrigation system. By leveraging program funds, they were actually able to replace their diesel motors with electric motors, which are far more efficient and much more cost effective to operate. Next slide, please. So this next project is a personal favorite of mine, but there is a nonprofit school in Mississippi that provides free training for students to become software developers. By participating in TVA's business building revitalization incentive offering, the school is able to convert an old garment factory into a larger campus. And this expansion also contains space for kind of a new business incubator with some also satellite office space for some of their business sponsors. Next slide, please. So this industrial project in Tennessee involves a replacement of an inefficient gas furnace used for curing with an efficient electric furnace. So in addition to the inefficiencies with the gas furnace, the company was unable to ever shut off the gas furnace due to the time needed to reach the temperature for the curing process. So with the new electric furnace, they're now able to shut off the equipment when it's not in use, so including nights and weekends. Next slide, please. And our final kind of project highlight today involves a Tennessee zinc mine. So the zinc had been transported over, a little over 2 miles via diesel trucks. And so as the price of zinc declined and the cost of diesel increased, operations were forced to stop for several years. So by converting some of this electric equipment from diesel to electric, production costs were lowered. So the electric equipment converted included 5 conveyor systems, which eliminated the need for those diesel truck transport. So with the increased zinc prices, program incentives, and lower operating costs, the mine was able to reopen a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. So where are we today? So after shifting program efforts to focus on, COVID response and recovery over the last 18 months or so, the program is excited to again be offering a variety of incentives for fiscal year 22. So as you can kind of see on the slide here, the offerings include incentives for both energy efficiency and electrification technologies, and also include, both financial incentives and education and training opportunities. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? So future initiatives that are being explored kind of are circled around the whole concept of energy equity. So TVA is working on some community-centered growth opportunities for some disadvantaged or smaller communities, and also a focus on school uplift activities, which again can both really help to address energy equity. There are also efforts around increasing and retaining Valley jobs and focusing on sector-based outreach. And I know that kind of regardless of what the future brings, TVA and the Energy Right program is going to continue to work towards that original goal of making life better for the people of the Tennessee Valley. And that is it. So thank you all for your time this afternoon, and Chris and I look forward to your feedback and answering any questions you may have.
Thanks, Jennifer. So we can go over to David. He's ready. There we go.
Greetings, everybody. This is David Nemtzow with the U.S. Department of Energy. Thanks for having me at the forum this year, and I'm sorry I can't be there in person with those of you who are going to be in person tomorrow. Hey, listen, I want to talk about an issue that is an innovation that is related to what we just heard from Christian and Jennifer about electrification, but it's not quite the same, and is also closely related to energy efficiency. Traditional energy efficiency, but not quite the same. And the topic is what we, the Department of Energy, call Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings, or GEB. Not the best acronym, I admit it, but you'll see why we gave it that name, because we want buildings to be, as they innovate into the future and become smarter, we want them not just to become smarter because smartness is a good thing, or because of all the other reasons people use smartness and connectivity, such as security or enjoying additional features, but also to make them more energy efficient and to perform better towards cleaning up the U.S. energy system. So that's what I'm going to cover. I run the department's Building Technologies office, and this is a major focus of our work. So if somebody could click for me. I'm going to tell you about GEBs. All right, so why do we do GEBs, Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings? Well, for a lot of reasons. One is to integrate variable renewables as they go. We all know that some renewables are dispatchable, but wind and solar are less so. And by being able to be more demand flexible, by making buildings more flexible using grid interactivity and smartness and connectivity, we can moderate and modulate their demand in a way that better integrates variable renewables. Number two, we're trying to, look, what all the second bullet says is we're trying to manage peak. We all know, I believe everybody at this forum knows that peak power production is the most expensive time it takes to create electrons, and typically the dirtiest too, and leads to reliability issues. So if we can shift demand off peak, we can improve reliability and lower some future CapEx that are coming. A third key element towards decarbonization, both for several reasons, including the integration of renewables, contribution to electrification that we just heard about, and again, to make buildings just more overall efficient. And finally, it gives consumers not just something to play with, but it lets them have better performance. So there are a lot of benefits there. And as you can see at the bottom, it accrues to multiple parties. Next, please. So look, we start here. There you go. If you unclick, it doesn't matter. You get the idea. You start with the occupant. I think that's rule number one of all demand side management. If the occupant ain't happy, nobody's going to be happy. But to deliver the services, we all know this from traditional efficiency, that's what efficiency is deliver the same or greater services using less energy. The difference here is a shade of gray, it's not a black or white issue, is to be able to use demand flexibility in a more sophisticated way. I'll give you an example, lighting controls. So look, all of us, if you can remember back to when you used to go to an office, you had an occupancy sensor most likely in that office, but it was probably a binary. Either it was occupied or it wasn't. It turned the lights on if it was occupied and off if it was vacated, fine. But for spaces that are more open, whether they're populated with cubicles or they're an airport or a retail mall, we want to do better than that. So sensors have gotten cheaper, connectivity has gotten stronger, so we can have more sensors that we can measure not just occupancy of a space, but where the people are and the quantity. And if we have if we use microprocessors and sophisticated algorithms, we can better control the lighting, not just the lighting, but you can see on the right, the HVAC. We can make HVAC be demand controlled, and holding aside COVID and the need to refresh air, we can do a much more sophisticated job of using systems when we need them and not when we don't need them, or somewhere in between. Better yet is when we can use a signal from the utility company that can also help feed that algorithm and decide, is power particularly scarce now or expensive? And that will help make these decisions. So that's what we're working on. And you can see with lighting, with HVAC on the left there, with dynamic windows on the right there, water heaters, major appliances, etc. And as end uses become more electrified, if Christian and if DC and TVA succeed in those electrification efforts, there will be more opportunities here to control end uses in a demand flexible way. Next, please. So that's what a GEB is, whether it's residential or commercial. We commissioned a study at DOE last year by Lawrence Berkeley Lab. All right, I was fooling with the slide. The URL isn't here, but don't worry, the URL is at the end. This is about a 70-page report. I commend you to it on providing a national roadmap. We made a series of recommendations, 14 recommendations in the roadmap, and broke them into 4 pillars. You can see them for yourself: advancing GEBs through R&D, enhancing the value to consumers through all sorts of methods, including valuation and price signals, empowering users to be able to better control their grid interactivity, and finally, a series of policy interventions. And I'll say this, and no matter where you work, we made recommendations, we made recommendations broadly. These are our recommendations, how we think the nation can make our buildings more grid interactive and more efficient. And several of these recommendations we made to ourselves, to my office, the Building Technologies Office, but several of them we made to you, to implementers, to utilities, to regulators. So see what you think and let us know. I also want to say this, and the Berkeley analysis, working with the Brattle Group, not only did these recommendations, but did a national assessment of the value for making buildings grid interactive. And we heard Liz Beardsley say at the beginning of this that when she was in Glasgow that there was a lot more attention to buildings than there used to be in the climate setting, which is a relief because after all, buildings are the largest energy consuming sector in the US economy. 39% of US energy is in buildings. It's more than transportation. 3/4 of electricity is in buildings. Now, when it comes to CO2, transportation is ahead of buildings, but buildings are enormous and they don't get the attention that we think they need to help contribute to these energy and climate problems. The Berkeley also with Brattle did this analysis looking at they estimated that over the next 2 decades, there'd be $100 to $200 billion opportunity for make buildings more grid interactive. I actually think that's where I put the pluses and parentheses, it's much higher. Because when Berkeley and Brattle did this analysis last year, it was before the current administration had raised the bar on decarbonizing the US's power grid, and before even the last year's quick growth in variable renewables. So the more variable renewables grow, the more decarbonization matters, the more valuable GEBs are. Next, please. So I'm going to talk a little faster. So as the expression goes, well, it is an expression, if one GEB is good, many GEBs must be better. And so what I want to talk about next is something we call connected communities. These are communities that are collections of GEBs. And you can ask, as we did, well, sure, you need to have more of them. It's a big country with 130 million buildings. So of course we have to do a lot of them. The question is, should we do them as communities? Are there economies of scale? Are there business models that will be able to serve a community that can't serve just random individual buildings? And that's what a connected community is, to look at ones that they don't have to be geographically co-located, but they probably will be. Next, please. And we borrowed this from a program we did a few years ago. And if you look at that footnote in the bottom left, it was a partnership where a Southern company led by their retail companies, Alabama Power and Georgia Power, and their research arm worked with Oak Ridge National Lab, EPRI, Pulte Home Builders, other home builders, Rheem and Siemens, and a bunch of manufacturers, and as well as my office and elsewhere at DOE, to try to demonstrate, to put connected communities on the ground. So I'll let you read this for yourself. But the community on the left, just outside of Birmingham, Alabama, was 62 single-family new homes with every exciting, shiny object you could want, from lots of insulation and induction cooking to high-quality fenestration, storage, heat pump water heaters, electric vehicle charging, smart thermostats, you name it, it was all there, as well as a microgrid with photovoltaics, natural gas backup, and lithium-ion batteries. And if you look at the middle table in the middle there, that community used 44% less power, less electricity, kWh, than at the baseline community. It was very successful, beyond our expectations, or even beyond our modeling. And at peak times, it used, it's not on here, about 34% less power at peak. So it in its first year of occupancy, it was very successful. The one on the right in Atlanta are townhomes. They don't have quite as many shiny objects there, but you can see the PV on top. They also have separate room. The top floor there is a room on a separate circuit. So there, if there is a power outage, what power is available from the PV and storage can be dedicated to one room with space conditioning and refrigeration. And well, it's in Atlanta, so I'm sure they also had TV so they could watch the Braves and the World Series. So these are two different examples, and so far so good. Next, please. And so at DOE last year, you might have seen it, we said, okay, let's try it. Those are two communities in the Southeast, new construction of homes, but this doesn't have to be residential. It could be mixed use. It could be commercial. It could be a campus. It can be all sorts of opportunities. And we wanted to look at it nationally to see how it might behave in different utility environment, regulatory environments, and price environments. Next, please. So we put out a competitive funding opportunity from my office, and we picked 10 projects. I'm sorry to say we picked 10 great projects. None of them are in Virginia. I know that, I noticed that when I put this slide together. And that's, I'll just say two things. One is, I hope we'll be able to do another round like this of demonstrations of these connected communities, again, looking at different needs in different situations around the country, making sure that underserved populations get served, not just affluent enfranchised people, that they look at commercial, residential, existing vehicles and storage and so on. And I hope we'll have funding to do this again. And I hope you and your partners in Virginia will think about putting in applications. I do want to say this, one more slide, and I'm almost done. Even if you're not directly part of it, these are demonstrations. They're only successful if they demonstrate something. If somebody could click for me. And so we are making sure that there is a national discussion here. We are using Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in the middle there to be a national coordinator, to share the research, to provide technical assistance, not only to those successful projects, but to other parties who want to conduct these on their own without having received funding in that last competition. And so stay tuned on that front. You can contact me or go through Berkeley Lab. It doesn't matter, to learn from that, and look forward. One more slide, I believe. And oh, sorry, this is just to say this is more than R&D. It's a lot more than R&D. And I just want to focus for a second on any of these, but especially on utility programs. I think utilities have a central role to play here. And there's a lot of value for utilities to be able to have buildings, which are, again, 3/4 of demand, even more at peak times, to be more flexible through their water heaters or their HVAC or their lighting. It doesn't matter. Ways to be able to better integrate grid needs. And then finally, before I turn it back to Liz, is finally click. There you go. This is how you find us. Thanks a lot. Look forward to working with everybody in Virginia.
Well, thanks everyone. That was great. And we have a few questions that have come in already. I have a bunch of my own to get things started. So feel free to add additional questions in the chat. And if you have someone you want to direct them to, you can indicate that. So thanks, Christian, Jennifer, and David. So as we kind of look from buildings to communities to the grid, and sort of this transition that we're already in, clearly, you know, we're going to need a lot of coordination, and we don't always have like the exact same metrics or goals in each of these scales. So I'm kind of wanting to hear your thoughts on sort of best practices or challenges, or sort of where we are with coordinating. You know, if we have, like I think TVA was talking about added load was sort of the way they were measuring the electrification, the beneficial electrification program, and presumably that load fits in with the TVA grid long-term plans. But then we also are concerned about, you know, cost to consumers on the other end. Energy savings is still really important as a metric. So I know it's a big question, but just curious if y'all have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, how many weeks do we have here, Liz, to discuss metrics? Look, you know, we spent a lot of time on that in my office as we built this program and before we put out this competitive funding. So I am going to give you opinions in the form of facts, and that is, yeah, there's too many metrics. And I think it is unrealistic to have a unified field theory here that combines all the metrics. So yes, I do think we need to integrate the metrics. You mentioned quite a few of them: kWh, CO2, dollars, peak kW, valley kW. I'll defer to others on metrics for consumer satisfaction. But so I think we need to try to integrate them, but not assume that there'll be a unified field theory where we can pull them all together. But that's something we're working on. We're working on with Berkeley Lab, and absolutely be delighted to be part of any conversation. And if one of these folks, Chris or Jennifer or Christian, that going to tell me they have found the unified field theory, then I'll stand down and just email it to me.
Jennifer or Christian, did you want to add anything on sort of collaboration across scales and how you're aligning goals?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working at this from a really local level, and just working with, you know, some of the contractors and directly with the homeowners. And so I know one thing that was a bit of a limiting factor with us is just even finding contractors that felt really comfortable doing this kind of work in the district. Like it's not something that we typically do, just doing a lot of electrification. We asked them before we did the program what their experience was in this, and they said that very few people, at least in DC, are asking for these types of conversions. And on their end, they were a little bit concerned about just how to do this and like how much work is involved with it and the costs associated with it. And so I think for us, it's really important just to foster, like get really fundamental in fostering like contractor like skill sets in this area, and just to, you know, kind of highlight that there is opportunity for this and it's worth them looking into it a little bit more. And also we've been working with Mitsubishi and some other manufacturers to see if they have Maybe there's a potential for retrofits where maybe we don't have to remove everything. There's a way that we can convert existing things. I think there's just a lot of opportunity and a lot of there's just a lot of unknowns with this, at least from what I've seen locally. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to just even collaborate a little bit more at a very local level to see this kind of progress a little bit more.
Thanks. Jennifer, were you going to add something?
No, I mean, I think they covered it, and Chris, feel free to chime in here too from TVA's perspective. When we're talking about metrics, we're looking at, what maybe internal TVA is needing for that kind of long-term planning or anything like that. So that's why we're mainly focused on, the load added or on the efficiency side, the energy reductions that can be expected. But I do think it would be very beneficial for everyone to have some sort of standardized metrics. We're kind of, singing from the same song sheet, so to speak.
Thank you. We had a question specifically for Christian. Someone asked, what is the best way for the private sector to engage with you, especially on new pilot program ideas for small to medium commercial buildings?
Yeah, I mean, they can just get my contact information and we can, figure something out. I know from our end, like our contract that we have right now with DC government, I mean, the focus is on reducing just kilowatt hours and MMBTU. So electrification is a little bit tricky with this kind of stuff. I know it's something that we're looking into and seeing how it can play a bigger role, but yeah, we're definitely looking for opportunities in the small commercial. So if somebody is interested in that, please contact me and we can talk about that.
Great. There was also a question which is specifically for the DCSEU, but I think it could actually apply sort of across the different sectors, and how are these programs being paid for? So is it, dependent on appropriations? Are there ways to leverage some of the energy cost savings or carbon reductions and and peak reductions and create some larger funding streams to help scale some of these programs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I know that the initial, like the DCSEU core contract is paid by a fee that's in everybody's utility bill. So there's a certain amount of money that gets funneled into an account to DC government, and then that gets funneled to us as the implementer. And so that funding we utilize to do mainly energy efficiency programs, so not necessarily just electrification. This specific pilot that we did a couple of years ago was outside funding that came from DC government for us to look into that. But I think there could be additional opportunities for DC in general to start finding ways to finance some of these electrification projects, because they do cost a little bit more than a conventional swap. So I mean, there does need to be additional ways for funding to come into that. But yeah, that's how we got funding for this. It was just a pilot that we got funding from DC government to do.
Jennifer and Chris, you all have been at this for a while and seem like you have a lot of data on costs and benefits. How are you able to continue? And it looks like you're hitting a lot of sectors already.
So Chris, do you want to take that one and how the program's funded?
Sure.
Perfect.
Thanks, Jennifer. Chris here with TVA. Thanks, Jennifer, for running everyone through the program. As far as funding goes, when we first started, definitely KWH was a big factor of showing, especially for beneficial electrification, of showing we're giving this money, this is the energy being added to the grid. And as we get along, we're starting to kind of swing that focus to be more of how much change can we affect in the community. So how much good can we do in the community in this? So it's more of the non-energy benefits per se that we're focusing on as far as funding goes.
And Chris, just to follow up, how's TVA working with local communities on, perhaps some of them have, energy poverty goals or greenhouse gas reduction goals, and is there a lot of coordination to kind of trade information so they have what they need to kind of know where your programs how they're going to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully in the TVA region, we have those 154 different local power companies, and they're all spread out across the valley. They're more or less the size of a county. So there are local municipalities and co-ops. And so they really have the finger on the pulse of that local community. And so they can help us identify those specific food deserts, or, we also use national opportunity zones to identify the areas of where maybe our schools efforts need to go, or even our community-centered growth. So, both those items.
Thank you. And speaking of funding, there was a small bill passed today or signed into law, I think within the last hour. So, and some funding is going to be heading over to BTO, I believe, to work on energy efficiency. Are there any highlights of the infrastructure bill that you'd want to share, David?
Yeah, thanks. Look, yeah, I'm enjoying it as much as anybody. As you can imagine, there's a lot of support that'll come to DOE. A lot of the action, I think this will be relevant to folks here today, is coming to my sister office, and that's the Weatherization and Intergovernmental Partnership Office. And that includes funding for state energy planning that only the states can apply for, as well as to community block grants for energy, ECBG, energy efficient community block grants that local governments and states can apply to. So a lot of the action will be there, but look, the rules of those haven't been written yet, and it's stay tuned for further development. We're talking about hundreds of millions and billions of dollars there. My office will have funding to work on building energy codes, again, working with state governments and local governments and others, working on schools in particular. So there's a whole variety of areas, and we're all just sort of taking it all in. And then, of course, there may also be another bill, but it's known in the vernacular as reconciliation, and that's even bigger money for building energy efficiency. So yeah, it could be a lot of resources coming out.
Great. Another question in the chat. So utilities are typically prohibited from incentivizing fuel switching. Any of the presenters want to talk about whether that's an obstacle to electrification and what might be done about that?
I can give a quick answer. So for us, that was also a huge barrier. Fuel switching wasn't allowed, I would say, maybe for the first 7 years that we started working in DC. So we've been able to do it as of a couple of years ago. So that was definitely a huge barrier for us. I know that now it's a little bit more, I think we're definitely allowed to do that. But the savings, how the savings are classified, and even the greenhouse gas reduction, like that whole calculation is still something that I'm trying to figure out myself. I know that it's changing how we're quantifying the savings because of that. Like we just released a new rebates for folks that there's a new law that came to DC where you're not allowed to use gas leaf blowers in DC. And so now they're moving all to electric. So we started offering rebates to try to support that. And that is definitely more of a greenhouse gas saving goal initiative, more so than the, obviously electric or gas saving measure. So yeah, it is kind of changing, and it's changing kind of quickly, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to play out. I don't know how it's been with Jennifer or other folks like in other scales, but for us, it's been something that we're trying to figure out how it's going to all play out, because our traditional way of evaluating things is different now.
No, Christian, I think you're exactly right with trying to figure out how it really fits into that regulated environment. And Chris, feel free to join in here as well. But TVA is not regulated, right? So they are able to they regulate themselves within TVA, so you don't have as much red tape or burdens to try and get some of these electrification efforts and initiatives approved. I know with some of the other utilities that we've kind of been working with across the country, it's really trying to explore it more on a kind of pilot basis. Let's kind of prove this out, see what it looks like, see what the ultimate benefit is to the customer base, right? Because that's the whole idea, is if you're taking customer funded dollars and using them to, entice a customer to potentially use more of your product through electrification, it can get, a little kind of in the gray area. So if you can kind of take it, prove out that this, really is benefiting the customers overall, right? With reduced maybe energy costs across the board. I mean, I think that that's how we've seen some programs be able to at least get started.
So another related area is electrification of transportation, and there's obviously an impact on grids and also on buildings in the sense of more buildings adding charging stations and potentially adding demand there. How are you? Do you feel like that new demand is being considered and is something that can be handled on the grids? Like, where are you? I know that's it seems that some grids are much more challenged to be able to take that on at scale or how quick, depending on how quickly it comes on. So just curious where you think we'll be in a few years, and are most grids now starting to get ready for that? David,
as far as TVA is concerned, we are figuring that out right now, and so especially in the B&I space, that's something special to be figured out with fleets and what that looks like if we were to do some sort of incentive or program. But TVA has an effort to be on the forefront of building the technology and building the infrastructure in our area. Right now, we're offering what's called the fast charging network to build a fast charging site every 50 miles within the main corridors throughout the Tennessee Valley. And so focusing on being on the forefront, and that way we are in with everyone who's involved in EVs in our area. I think it's really going to help us understand what grid transformations need to happen as we go along.
All right. Well, it's really exciting hearing about these projects and seeing the improvements that are being made. I think it's going to be really pretty amazing what happened over the next 3, 5, 10 years. So thanks to each of you for joining us and sharing your stories today and for all that you're doing. So, and thanks everyone who joined us today on the webinar. I think we go back to the main room now. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone so much. We're going to move you back to the main room in just a moment for Chelsea's last remarks. And as Liz said, we really appreciate your time and your participation today, specifically to David, Jennifer, Christian, Liz, and Chris for your help in the Q&A. We really hope that we will see all of you tomorrow at Dorey Park Recreation Center, and that we will be able to actually see the top half of some people's faces for the first time in 2 years. So I'm going to move you back to the room, and we will see you in a moment.
Excellent tech work.
Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. I hope that you enjoyed today's panels. We're excited again to have so many of you joining today. I know the majority of you will be joining us again tomorrow as well. We just wanted to remind you, you can go to the next slide. Go to the next. So we just wanted, sorry about that. We again just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our sponsors, community housing partners, Dominion Energy, Siemens, TRC, Virginia Energy, ABM, Schneider, Rappahannock Electric Cooperative, Virginia Department of Housing Community Development, and ODAC. Just a reminder for those of you who are attending tomorrow, that tomorrow will be in person. It will be 1:30 to 4 at the Dorey Park Recreation Center that is in Eastern Henrico. And then that will be followed by a happy hour at Triple Crossing in Fulton. Those are very close to each other, both in Eastern Henrico and the eastern end of the city. So we are so excited to see so many of you in person. It will be 2 years since our last in-person event, and we are looking forward to celebrating with you. So we will see you then. Have a great day. Take care.